Good evening. Hello. My name is Jacob Brooks. I run the gallery and lecture series here at the New York Studio School, and I am honored to welcome you to the final Fall 2025 Evening Lecture Series lecture. If you are in person, please turn off your cell phones. Like fully turn them off. Don't even put them on vibrate. It's fine if they're on vibrate, but it's way better if we don't hear them at all. We have time at the end of this lecture for a Q&A with the audience. If you have a question when we open the floor, please raise your hand as high as possible, and my colleague, Blake, will bring a microphone to you so that not only can we hear you, but people online can hear you. If you're on Zoom, there's a little box at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. You can click that. That will ensure that your question can be read. After the lecture, please stay here and drink and eat food with us. New York Review of Books will also have copies of the book that we're discussing tonight for sale right here at this table. Please at least look through it, but also please buy it. The New York Studio School is grateful to the following funders for their support of the 2025-2026 Evening Lecture Series. The New York State Council on the Arts, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, the Robert Lehman Foundation, the Samuel H. Kress Foundation, and many generous individual contributors. I'm now delighted to introduce our speakers. Tony Towle was born in New York in 1939. He began writing poetry in 1960 when he was 21, becoming associated with the New York School starting in 1963. When he took poetry workshops with Kenneth Koch and Frank O'Hara at the New School, his major collection was North, the Frank O'Hara Award selection for 1970. Since then, Towle has published 11 books of poetry, most recently Late Studies and Sketches in 2025. His My First Three Books collection in 2020, which combines an interview, photographs, and a reading of early poems on a CD, as an introduction by John Yau. In addition to the Frank O'Hara Award, Towle has received grants and fellowships from the Foundation for Contemporary Art, the National Endowment of the Arts, the New York State Council on the Arts, the Ingram Merrill Foundation, the Poets Foundation, among other honors. Through Ted Berrigan, Brainard became Towle's roommate from December 1963 to June 1964, and was a friend thereafter. Coincidentally, this is the time in which the collaborations for C Comics #1 were made. John Yau is a poet, curator, and art critic who's been publishing reviews and essays on art and literature since 1978. He has authored and contributed to numerous monographs, including Joe Brainard, The Art of the Personal, Catherine Murphy, John Pye, Liquid Steel, Richard Archswagger, Into the Desert, A Thing Among Things, The Art of Jasper Johns, and Joan Mitchell, Works on Paper, 1956 to 1952. His recent book of poetry include Tell It Slant and Genghis Khan on Drums. Diary of Small Discontents, new and selected poems from 1974 to 2024 is due out this fall. Since 2012, his weekly reviews have appeared in the online magazine Hyperallergic. Bill Kartalopoulos, sorry, I just butchered your name.
Kartalopoulos.
Thank you. Is a comic scholar, educator, curator, and editor. He is the programming director for the MoCA Arts Festival and is a member of the organizing committee for the New York Comics and Picture Story Symposium. He was the series editor for the #1 New York Times bestselling Best American Comics series. He teaches graduate level courses about comics at Washington University in St. Louis, the School of Visual Arts in New York City, and the, I can't pronounce this name.
That's just the University Picardie Jules Verne, Amiens.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Give it up for Bill. He is currently finishing a book about comics forthcoming from Princeton University Press. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. To begin our conversation, I know that Tony had something that he wanted to say to sort of set the scene for all of it.
Well, that's all I can do. I didn't know Joe that well. I'm a poor substitute for Ron Padgett because he knew it from the creative end, and he knew Joe from Tulsa and so forth. So I'm just going to, this won't be a conversation except with my other people that you can't see. And I'm just going to be a 5-minute sort of mise en scène of the that little piece of the Lower East Side, which was what it was called then, instead of the East Village. So, I'm just 5 minutes. I already knew Joe Brainard's two best friends from Tulsa, Ted Berrigan and Ron Padgett. In the fall of 1963, we lived in the East Village, then the Lower East Side, and were three of about a dozen young poets who would come to be known as the second generation of the New York School, following the first generation of Frank O'Hara, Kenneth Koch, John Ashbery, Barbara Guest, and James Schuyler, all of whom eventually participated in creating comics for Joe's project. Joe and I met through a series of coincidences surrounding a dilapidated apartment on the second floor of 441 East 9th Street, just west of Tompkins Square. Frank O'Hara had turned the place over to me and Frank Lima, another aspiring poet, when O'Hara and his roommate, Joe Lasure, moved to a loft on Broadway and 10th Street. They bequeathed a large kitchen with a bathtub, naturally, and an adjoining minuscule bedroom, about 6 by 8 feet, that had a cutout window onto the kitchen and no outside windows. And the cutout was over the bathtub. For what? I don't want to think about the arrangements. But I used the bathtub open, but there was nobody in the other room. Used to have endless conversations with Frank O'Hara, and the lines on the two phones in the apartment, which shows that it was owned by Frank O'Hara, where they were about 20 feet long, and that was barely more than the size of the apartment. But there was no air conditioning, so I'd sit in the bathtub, put the cigarettes there, make a drink, and sit and make phone calls in the tub. It was so damn hot. Anyway, so this was, let's see, when Frank and Joe Lasure moved to Broadway, they bequeathed the kitchen with the tub, and what passed as a living room from the kitchen and a second very small bedroom, but it had a door, very elegant. And there was a little cutout up high on an air shaft, which was better than no windows at all. I moved to the good bedroom when Frank Lima moved in with his girlfriend on 2nd Avenue, and I had the place to myself. But there were few secrets in our neighborhood, and Ted Berrigan said to me one day that since I had a spare bedroom, I don't know how he could have known that, he had a friend at the moment living in Boston that would need a place to stay when he came back to New York. I wasn't really interested. I realized I liked the idea of living alone for a while, but Ted persisted. And I realized it wouldn't be a bad idea if I had someone to split the $54 a month rent. Oh. Yes, you heard that number right. And then Ted used a really dirty trick. He employed self-deprecation. And he's really a nice guy, not at all like me. So Joe moved in December into the most unpleasant of the two bedrooms, proceeding to use the space as well as for a bedroom. He just had a rolled up mattress, use it as a studio where he created an astonishing array of collages and assemblages, the materials for which he scavenged on the streets every night. He lived on Terrytons, Pepsis, and Twinkies. I liked to drink, so I needed protein. I would cook, say, pork chops, and I always offered Joe a share of the dinner, and he always politely declined. Not drinking was the only healthy thing he did. What I didn't know was that, like Ted, he took a lot of uppers, a lot of amphetamines, which was not at all apparent to me, maybe because I didn't do pills, I didn't recognize it. I don't remember when Joe asked me to collaborate. I'm pretty sure he gave me a choice, and I decided on Wonder Woman. And I don't remember what I passed on. I believe the offer was made before June, because Joe had moved out by then to live with Kenward Elmsley. He had come out that spring with Joe Lasser. I didn't particularly want to do this collaboration. In other words, he was in the closet when he moved in December. And when he came out, well, if you don't mind a little gossip, he had said something that I thought was sort of equivocal. And being straight, I just ignored it. I wasn't interested in getting into any discussion of it, although it was not a pass. Maybe, I don't know what it was. But when I was over at one of my many evenings of drinking with Joe Lasser and Frank O'Hara, Joe Lasser said, "Oh, Tony, your roommate is so cute, but I know I wouldn't have a chance." I said, "I don't know." Next thing you knew, they were an item. So I don't think I was really responsible for Joe coming out, which was a very great part of his life and his work. But I think he was about ready to do it. Ted Berrigan was presumed to have said, well, I'm glad he's doing something. I don't think he was doing anything. So then that was that. Anyway, let's see. So by June, he was out. He was living with Kenward. He went from Joe to Kenward, and that was the summer of 1964. That was the beginning of their serious relationship, which lasted their entire lives. And I didn't particularly want to do the collaboration. I was not a collaborationist, so don't shoot me. Let's see. And I wasn't good at it. I was just starting out and developing my own poetry or working on it. And I was just getting to I thought, more interesting poems than what I had been writing. So this was just a distraction. And I knew Ron and Ted did collaboration so well that I didn't want to, I felt it was their thing, it wasn't my thing. And, but like Ted, Joe could be persuasive. I think I may have said, oh, I was probably at least lukewarm on the subject. But like Ted, Joe could be persuasive also in a very different style, very different personality. And I'm glad he didn't take my initial no for an answer. And for C Comics, too, I needed no persuasion at all. That's it.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Sure.
Thank you. That was really amazing. Tony, I know initially you said that you could contribute this introduction, which thank you for contributing it, and then you felt like maybe that would be it. But C Comics grew out of C Magazine, right?
Yeah, well, I came from C Magazine.
Right, because Joe was doing the covers for C Magazine.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in general, I think one of your questions here, which I have, most of which I have no comment on, but some of which I do.
Yeah. So how can you give us background on how C Magazine came together?
Oh, because
Okay.
that came in May. The first issue was in May. Mm-hmm. I think they just wanted to do something, Ted and Ron, mm-hmm. and also Dick Gallup and Joe as the house artists. They were doing things in Tulsa, and now that they're in New York, nobody's going to stop them from carrying on in the same interesting manner.
Yeah.
And in May and that summer, frankly, that summer I was actually living in the Albert Hotel with a girlfriend, and she went back to North Carolina, as it were, and so I didn't see much of Frank Lima. The beginning of June was so we never really saw each other. And by the time I got back, he was marrying living with his, who would be his second wife, Schjeldahl. And so we had a wonderful relationship because we never saw each other. First 3 months I wasn't there, the then he wasn't there. But he became a chef, frankly, very interesting. And he would leave I would come back to change on the weekend because I was sort of living at the Albert Hotel with this woman. And Frank would make a pot of chili and it would be on the stove. I would eat that when I came home. It did become home. I moved out of this place in the summer of '65, and so I didn't see Joe too much after he moved with Kenwood, and eventually by 1969, he was spending weekends in Vermont, summers rather, in Vermont. And I was never invited there with my wife because Kenwood would give us his townhouse for the summer to have somebody look after it. So he was my daughter's godfather, and that was a way of, fulfilling those obligations, as it were. So we could never be where Joe was in the summertime because he was up there and we were in New York. And when they come back, we would go back to our 3.5-room apartment in Soho.
Yeah.
That was a bit of a real estate shock. 5-story townhouse on Greenwich Avenue. Anyway, so, but I was always aware. We were friends,
Right.
And I was aware of his work, and I went to it. And it was quite extraordinary what he did. And actually, John's book reveals a lot,
Yeah.
shows a lot.
Yeah.
And I mean, he did a lot. He was sort of unique. As to whether he was a pop artist
That was my next
per
question.
se, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Looking at the other pop artists, there were Rosenquist and Lichtenstein, I guess, primarily perhaps, or to the fore. And I don't consider Jasper Johnson or Robert Rauschenberg pop artists. They're somewhere other, I think. I don't know, John may.
Well, they're other.
Yeah, they're very much other.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're pretty unique in their own right.
I don't think he considered himself a pop artist. Because there's an interview with Tim Belugos where he talks about he doesn't have a product and he's kind of a flop outside of New York.
Yeah.
And he says, I'm not Andy Warhol. And he goes on and on about that.
Oh, yes.
That's quite an amazing interview
Yeah.
because he really sets himself apart. And Warhol liked him and kind of was trying to be friends with him.
You did a screen test, right?
What?
Joe Brainard did a screen test with Warhol. Yeah.
And Joe kind of separated himself from Warhol. But Warhol's also a guy who went to a poetry reading and turned to, I forget who it was, and said, John Giorno, why are poetry readings so boring? So I don't think Joe and Andy would have gotten along in that level.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
and the reading was O'Hara and Ashbery. That
Okay,
was the
well.
reading that he found boring.
Well,
He was interested in making contact with O'Hara because he knew I knew him.
Right.
And he asked me a couple of times, and because Frank was a little iffy about his work, Andy was right about that.
Right.
But I think Frank accepted the fact that he was. And of course, after Frank's death, he would become a lot more so.
Right.
But I also did a screen test, and it scared the hell out of me because somebody said that it was going to be in a portfolio of 13 most beautiful boys. I said, wait a minute. That is not me.
I don't know. It's pretty good company, you know.
That is not me. But that was shelved anyway. But Andy actually was interested in poetry to an extent, and he asked me for a poem of mine. This was in '64. It was one of my sort of pop collage poems, and people from the '70s, people who know his reputation from the '70s. He was interested in downtown poetry,
Yeah.
But he was.
Yeah.
Well, Warhol also is the only artist other than Joe who did a cover for C, a journal of poetry that you were asking about before. He did the cover for the 4th issue, but the rest, after I think the 3rd one, were all drawn by Joe Brainard. And I feel too like maybe John Giorno and maybe Gerard Malanga were kind of almost like ambassadors between like the Warhol crowd and the poetry crowd or
Yeah,
something.
I would think that's what I think.
Yeah.
I don't know that Jerry was an ambassador. He was out for himself.
All right.
Excuse me.
I would.
I'm saying
He
so.
is. Yeah, Jerry once Gerard came to my house, and I said to the person I was living with, he's going to go to the M's in the bookcase. And he did. And then we weren't friends anymore because his book wasn't there.
It's all coming out tonight.
Yeah, this is the perfect. It's the end of the season. We're loosened up, and I'm glad the energy is.
Actually, whether John Giorno is a pop poet is an interesting question,
Right.
because by definition, he was doing what Roy Lichtenstein was doing. Excerpting from existing materials. I mean, if you put it that way, I mean.
Yeah.
And actually, here's a bit of John Giorno started out. Ted Berrigan was doing editing for him, or going over his. Ted told me about this guy who's writing this terrible romantic poetry, but he's paying him to go through it, all these dull poems, and that was John Giorno
Yeah.
writing from even a year later. You apparently wouldn't believe it. And also, I have once, and I forget exactly. I went to dinner with Ted and John was bringing a woman to the. That's how early it was. And this was before he even came out, let alone doing those, rather shocking Cuban army officers kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I actually knew him before, briefly.
I just to jump back to the pop art thing. It's not that I think that Joe existed is like making work, especially these comics, at like a really interesting time, because it feels like he's sort of if I see comics feels like it's like an inside joke almost between friends. Like there's serious collaborations, really great work comes out of it, but it feels like an inside joke between these friends, and it feels like.
I don't think it was an inside joke. I think everybody looking at it freshly, thinking, first of all, when I opened it up, my complimentary copy opened up, I started laughing.
Yeah.
I didn't forget what it was, but there are certain, even if they're not funny, they're quirkily amusing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And some of them are outright. Jim the Sheep, Cezanne.
Yeah.
Ron Cezanne, I think, was utterly minimalist,
Yeah.
and I think it's one of the best.
It's amazing. No, it's incredible.
one-
Yeah.
It's,
So
it's absolutely great.
Yeah. Yeah.
He did collaborations with Ron and Ted. There's this big notebook that's in the University of California, San Diego, based on some kind of laxative, and which laxative was better.
Yeah.
That was an inside joke.
Yeah.
And Pat was doing it, and it was just, and I mean, that has never been published or even really I could only get a few pages into my book, but it was outrageous.
Yeah.
Well, I think one difference is that, especially thinking about both the idea of like an inside joke, thinking about pop art too. It also kind of, if you're thinking about the context of the period, it sort of raises also these ideas of like kitsch or camp and whatever also. But I think in general, I think all of that stuff kind of courses through C Comics. But I think to me, it's sort of a couple of things that maybe make it a sort of special body of work. I mean, there are several, but a couple of things that I identify that are maybe relevant to what you're asking about is that I think in general, there's a real fondness for comics in general that comes through. It's not just like excerpting the tear-stained woman from the romance comic and exaggerating it or whatever, And also, too, I think, to me, I think there are a couple of things that, from my perspective anyway, kind of open up why comics worked for Joe is that, first of all, he and Ron and Ted, and Pat came from Tulsa to New York, and you already introduced that idea of the first generation, second generation New York school, these kind of, sort of like monkish, but, microcosmic things. But nevertheless, they entered a milieu where artists and writers were already collaborating, Like there's that great collaboration between Frank O'Hara and Larry Rivers' Stones, that series of lithographs, and there was just Jenny Quilter did that whole big book on poets and painters collaborating as part of the New York School, and that's like right from the beginning. That really precedes all of them coming here. And the other, one thing that Ron told me was that on-the-spot collaboration was not comfortable for Joe. I think he was, when you look at the drawings, it's like, they're not fussy, but they're also very intentional. I think there's a real focus in his drawing where, there's just something where he's constantly fluidly like what to put in, what to leave out, how to arrange things next to one another. And I think it just wasn't comfortable for him. But the methodology for the comics worked, that like he could draw the comics and then give them to the poets to write in. And also too, I think his sense of composition was such that like he knew like, okay, this space is for text. And he knew it would work compositionally, whatever that text might be. So there's a sense of it being a bit of a kind of controlled collaboration that I think was more comfortable for him than just sitting down with a big piece of paper and a bunch of people.
And for the poets, too.
Yeah.
I think one reason I don't think there's many inside jokes there is because none of us were familiar with doing that. So there's no jokes. You're faced with Barbara Guest, me, Jerry Malanka for that matter, John Ashbery. This was terra incognita for everyone. So you need a tremendous familiarity to have inside jokes. You never saw the other persons until it came out. I don't know what John Ashbery did until it was published, or anyone else for that matter. They had to spend so much energy in the aesthetic faced with a new deal. You're not thinking about, how can I do something that Jimmy Schuyler will be amused by?
Sure.
You guys, you got to do this thing. You said you would do it.
One class of 1948 that he did with Bob Creeley. That's amazing. That didn't get it. That's just a separate thing that he did.
That's a later piece, after C Comics. It's one of the later ones he did.
Bill, you mentioned in the essay in the book that these comics are like half of the comics that he produced. And Joe, I know that you, or not Joe, sorry, John, you mentioned that like the first time that you came into contact with Joe's work was at a show where there was 1,500 works at the wall,
It was the Fishback
Yeah.
You were
show.
at that 1975 exhibit,
Yeah.
like basically the last big exhibit.
Right.
Yeah.
So I had just gotten to New York, and then I kind of fell in with a group of people who said, "Oh, there's this amazing show, at Fishback, and it's 1,500 people, 1,500 works." And I remember someone else saying, "Yeah, the registrar really hates him for this because he had to, do the entry for all works. She had to do the entry,
And a lot of
for
it's
all
like
50.
collages on cigarette boxes, and
They were, I mean, they were matchbooks. So
Yeah.
I remember seeing, like, it was like, give him something, he's
Yeah.
going to do something to
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
And then I later found out that he didn't want to get them back, so that he told his friends that they could buy it for $25.
Yeah.
Ones that were left. I mean, he just wanted to make it, and kind of not have anything to do with it anymore.
Yeah. That's like an insane output.
Yeah,
An insane,
highly prolific artist.
Yeah. So I guess I'm curious if any of you have any insight into. I know that he gave up. I mean, he was crippled by doubt. It sounds like from like 1975 onward with art. But he
made art after he withdrew.
I read, but I'm sure certainly. But I guess I have read that he gave up on art to read. Like he said.
Well,
specifically
yeah,
to
he did.
read.
I mean, I wrote a letter to him, and his letter back to me was, "I'm sitting by the pool. He's in Vermont. I'm going to read all of Charles Dickens for the second time." And I'm thinking, oh, fuck, that's like 37 novels. I've read 3.
Yeah.
So he was like, but his letters were like written like a 6th grader on yellow lined paper with big letters. It was quite interesting.
Wow.
I think he made art. I mean, his doubt was whether he was a good painter or not.
Yeah.
That was his biggest doubt.
Yeah,
But you see certain paintings by him and just go, oh, why did he have doubts?
Yeah. Well, it's there in the hand, but I'm interested in this doubt because I know that somewhere in a letter he wrote that he's lacking something that I believe it was Alex Katz and de Kooning have.
Right.
And you can look at the comics and like there's not only like an incredibly sure hand,
right,
but also he's like the way he'll put together like a 7-Up logo with like Wonder Woman or something is incredible. But I'm curious as to like in your research, Bill and John and Tony and
he was
Nguyen.
more comfortable drawing than painting.
Yeah,
I think that was really the issue. Drawing is not the same as painting.
Right.
But I think what he envied in de Kooning and Katz was they could draw in paint.
Yeah.
And I don't think he felt that he got somewhere where it was his own. He's using other people's stuff in the comics and stuff like that.
And John, you mentioned somewhere else. Sorry, I did a lot of research this week. John, you mentioned Joe's proximity to like less like Warhol and the pop artists and more like to mail art and people like I believe Ray Johnson and Bruce Conner. I was wondering if you could expand on that. At all.
Well, I think that I don't think he ever met them, but both of them made art that's sort of not capitalist. Mm-hmm. Ray Johnson mailing art to people. And collaborating. I mean, Ray Johnson called me up and started talking to me because he knew that I was interested in Anna May Wong. So we had this like wacky conversations about Anna May Wong. And then Bruce Conner, I mean, he's making
How
work.
could it fail to be wacky?
And Bruce Conner was the same way. I mean, he didn't want to, make kind of art that's a product. Yeah. I mean, he claims that this is art. I mean, he makes these drawings up to a certain point. When he's 65, he says he makes up these other figures to make the drawings. Mouse, and things like that. And then, of course, that lessens the value of the work because it's not, quote, made by Bruce Conner.
Yeah.
And someone would say, well, that's a pseudonym. He said, no, these figures really exist. They argue with me all the time. They tell me I'm a shitty artist and I have to work like them. I mean, it's just really nutty stuff,
Yeah.
Well, I think Bruce Conner is an interesting point of comparison too, because you know, and Tony was referring to this earlier, talking about how Joe used that little room as a studio too. I mean, now it's kind of funny to think that, like, I think if, like, you could, it's possibly true now that the thing Joe Brainard is most famous for is the book I Remember.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's been so widely read.
Right.
But in his time, he was a visual artist, and initially, and quite often, even in that last show that you were talking about, a collage and assemblage artist,
Right.
you know, so it's like there was that show at MoMA, The Art of Assemblage, like,
Right.
you know, in the early 60s,
Right.
you know, and Bruce Conner was kind of also kind of an early assemblage
Right.
type of artist.
Right.
And in a way, too, you know, an artist who, you know, I don't think Joe necessarily ever, I don't know if he met him or not. He may have, when he went out to California and did the Bolinas Journal, I think he may have met Jess.
Yes,
Jess
right.
Collins
Right.
in California at
Right.
that point. But I mean, that's like also an artist who has a kind of similar trajectory. I was
Right.
thinking, you know, like doing collage in a sort of in-between way, also collaborating a lot with poets in
Right.
a writerly community, but on the West Coast, you know.
Right.
But anyway, but yeah, and Joe's, you know, Joe's first shows were collage and assemblage shows, and his last show was a collage
Right.
show. You know, and in a way, too, it's like this process.
And I think
of-
he showed with the same gallery that showed Bruce Conner, Charles Allen.
maybe so,
Yeah, he showed both Bruce and Joe.
Okay. And in a way, too, it's like if you think of this collaborative process, it's almost like engineering a kind of assemblage of like, here's the space for the text that the
Right.
poets are going to provide, you know?
Right.
And sometimes even some of these pages, they almost look like collage mediated through Joe's hand, you know, where he's like pulling imagery from different places, but sort of synthesizing it into a drawing, you know, that then becomes a drawing of a comics page that then gets filled with text by poets. So it's kind of interesting
And also,
to think of it that way.
Bruce collaborated with Michael McClure.
Mm-hmm.
They grew up together, and Ray Johnson always wanted language. He knew the writer William Wilson.
Well, Bruce Conner was also from Wichita, so he was
That's
kind of
right.
part of that Wichita vortex of
Right.
like beat poets too.
Right.
Yeah.
Bill,
The thing about not collaborating, I think, so that John Ashbery told me the story of John and Kenward and Joe would make collages in Vermont after dinner. But this was Joe's thing, was getting these two other guys to make collages. And then at one point, I guess after Joe died, there's a whole envelope of stuff that Joe had set aside for John and mailed it to him, and that kind of provoked him to start. Oh, I guess John had found it at one point, and then started making collages using all these things that Joe said. Oh, you should make collages out of these. So I think that's. I mean, he inspired a lot of people, and then the story. Is it like the postcard stories by Kenward Elmsley? It was based on the idea of making collage postcards and then writing stories based on the collages. Which is something Ashbery told me they were interested in doing.
Kenward had a great collection of early postcards.
Right.
Because I know, because I since I was there during the summer, I ran across it. And that inspired me to do a postcard project later with an artist named Gene Hollibert. That was actually from Kenneth, knowing that from Kenneth's, Kenward, rather.
You just that entire conversation answered like all of my questions. But Bill, I was wondering, you mentioned to me in setting up this event that you had a bunch of things that could not make it into your essay.
Oh, yeah.
I was wondering if you could, if there's anything especially juicy. Tony already gave us some gossip.
Well, no, nothing juicy like that, you know. But one thing that was really funny is in the second issue. Well, and this kind of relates to Tony's piece too, you know, because first of all, I've been doing a lot of research in archives about C comics and Joe Brainard's comics. There's a lot of great stuff at the Beinecke at Yale. I also went out to UCSD and spent a day out there, but also here at the New York Public Library, the Berg has amazing things, and they had some papers of Kenneth Koch at the New York Public Library, and I was looking through that stuff, and there's a story in C Comics #2, a comic written by Kenneth called The Earth Machine. Yeah. So I found, which is a wonderful one. I mean, it's one that I really love. And I found this folder, and it had the manuscript copy of all the text that he had written. Mm-hmm. So presumably he'd gotten the pages of comics, the empty pages, with the empty word balloons and everything, and he had written this text. And then there were these other texts with 2 other titles. One was called The Orangutans, and I forget what the other one was. And I'm looking at these other ones and I'm reading them and I'm like, I don't know what these are these for something else or something that never got published? And I'm taking pictures of everything, and eventually I realize he got these pages of comics and wrote 3 different texts for the same pages of comics, but with the pages in different orders.
Oh, cool.
So, I feel like, I'm very tempted, to try and get permission to make some zine out of the Kenneth Koch variations or something
might as well.
like that, But then what I also noticed actually in Tony's piece, rereading it, Girl's Eye from C Comics #2, one thing I noticed for the first time, on the 4th page, there's this figure, and you've written, I'm Ethel Merman or Jane Withers, see me again on page 8. So I'm like, okay, so I'm counting out the pages, and I go to page 8, and the figure is not there. But then there's a similar figure on the next page, page 9, who says, I'm Ethel Merman. Then I realize all of these pages have page numbers that have been scribbled out, and it looks like page 9 was originally page 8. There was a very loose process behind this, where it's here are the pages. You could rearrange them if you want,
It was loose. It would have to be if I were doing it, because I didn't know what I was doing.
Well, thank you. Wonderful. We're ready for questions. We're ready for audience questions. Right up here.
So the outtakes, there will be a whole book.
There's info.
Really.
There's a fair bit of info.
It should just be on.
This gentleman has a question.
My first draft was 10,000 words. And
well, gentlemen, first of all, thank you for a very, very great conversation. I am 63. I graduated art school in the 1980s. Eventually, kind of in my 30s, I came across Fred McDarra's The Artist's World in Pictures, right? And so the picture you're painting of the New York school in that period, for people like me, was something that I romanticized. I was like, God, I wish I could have lived in that kind of New York City. Tony, you said Joe was an aspiring poet. Aspiring to what?
No, I'm sorry. I said that about Frank Lima.
Right, okay, so you said that kind of person is aspiring to what?
Oh, yes,
because they're kind of taking the piss out of the mainstream. So today, downtown is more valuable real estate-wise than uptown. So that kind of world has won. Did you guys, he didn't think he would one day be a big poet and move to Park Avenue, right? You guys were kind of it. What did you think of as success? Or what did you think in that period as success?
I don't know. I think I had a reasonable attitude, but there is no Park Avenue for downtown poets then. As a metaphor. But that was Frank Lima. Frank Lima and I were on the same level. And he got to be known a little better than I because he came from the ghetto, the Spanish ghetto. And I don't know if there's going to be more about Frank Lima, I think, later next year, because I think Hanging Loose magazine is doing a supplement on him, and he's a very interesting poet in his own right. where he came from. But he never wanted to, we got to be very good friends even though we weren't really roommates. He was my closest poet colleague friend up until the 70s. We saw each other often. And when I was girlfriendless, after they used to have me over to dinner on 2nd Avenue, I was Frank and Shayla's bachelor friend for a while. Come over and eat and drink, and we'd gossip. But I don't think in either of our cases, I don't know about Ron, I mean, anything that comes along is gravy, is serendipity. I don't think Ron, for example, is planning, I'm going to get the Robert Frost Award in 10 years, that kind of thing. I don't think that computes. That may compute for academic poets because I'm going to be a PhD and I'm going to teach, graduate literature, and but in our circles down there, I don't think it was planned at all.
All that stuff is square, right? And
No, not square.
zero.
No, not in a beat hip way. No, I don't mean that. Just be real. Just be real. Your poetry is not going to get you on TV, except in one of the
It was
most.
corny, you didn't want that.
No, it wasn't corny. I think you're putting a beat of a late 50s beat aspect. No, man, we don't do that shit. It wasn't that. It's just you're doing your own thing. And if somebody comes along and says, "Hey, that's really great. We'd like to publish you. We'd like you to read or something," you're not looking for that. It's not. At least then, maybe there's some poets now that are playing it that way, but I don't think I'm speaking for a lot of poets. I mean, I don't think,
Speaking for all poets.
and maybe I shouldn't, but
Okay.
Yeah.
There are representative poets.
John gave me
Are
permission.
there any other questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's probably not completely satisfying answer, but
Hi, thank you. Great panel. This question is for John Yau. Hi, John. I wonder if you can clarify, I think, something I lost the train of thought on, speaking about Brainard's comfort level of drawing versus painting. I think you said he was more comfortable painting rather than drawing.
No,
and that's
he's more comfortable drawing rather than...
Okay. Could you just say that again, that whole bit, maybe?
He's more comfortable drawing, DRAWING, than painting.
And he was admiring some other artists that he felt could do.
The context that was brought up in was I was talking about, or asked a question about, or Joe had journaled at one point or written to somebody.
It was in an interview, I think.
He was like, I am lacking something that Katz and de Kooning have.
Yeah, right.
I think, it's kind of interesting to hear that, admission, because it seems like in so many ways, all of everything that, when you think of whatever, the New York School and Joe Brainard and all of that, it seems like such a kind of almost like not even important enough to rebut that kind of previous, like, mid-century modernism,
Plus, he didn't go to art school.
idea. It almost seemed like their whole operation was to kind of just treat that as if it was irrelevant almost, and just kind of embrace making art that was more about daily life and things that were important to them personally.
There's a great collage where he makes fun of de Kooning.
Yeah,
Sort of,
right,
I mean,
yeah.
that one with the coal miner.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
such a weird
Got
collage.
the little one, yeah. It's like the one piece
He made a
of color.
collage where this coal miner's clearly dying, and this man is standing next to him with no shoes, and the woman, and they're really dirty. And then up above is a painting, and it's a de Kooning painting. Like, okay,
Yeah.
what is he saying here?
Right.
I mean, that just shows. I think that does just show you like how strong like ideology is in general. That
Yeah.
like that it's no matter what he did and how much everything about it seemed to embrace this casualness, there was still this feeling that like there is something that is anointed by these institutions. There's something that a painter like, whoever that might be, de Kooning, sees that I just don't see or don't have, or an impulse that doesn't drive me that way, and but at the same time, I think it's also, in one of the interviews, even years before he stopped publicly showing work, I think it might have been an interview with Anne Waldman, where he says something like, "Oh, sure, I could give up making art very easily," which is interesting. The idea that, like, as a kind of maybe antidote to the sort of myth of the kind of driven artist, where it's like you're somehow become like this unmediated, this like just this mediation between your soul and a canvas or something like that.
Also, when they came to New York, Ron and Jed and Joe, the show they liked most was the Dada and the Assemblage show.
Right.
I mean, they went to that over and over, and Ron talks about it was their education, and they didn't really talk about like the Picasso show or the Matisse, you know what I mean?
Right.
It was
Right.
the show they went to.
Yeah.
And I feel like one of the things about that show is it's more democratic. I mean, you can feel, anybody can go there. I mean, you can say, oh, I can paint like that, but not really, but you can really kind of feel like, oh, I can cut some stuff up and glue it together.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like scissors. Like everybody learns how to use scissors in the second grade, right? That's it. That's your art education, and a little paste, right? And you're making art,
Easy.
children.
Questions?
But also I'll add maybe another thing, which is I think too, it's just worth noting that I think in the 1960s when they came out to New York, they encountered a much smaller, more permeable art world.
Right.
And I think certainly, my sense of Joe Brainard is that just temperamentally, he wasn't really someone who was going to do the things involved in being like a successful gallery artist, as that
Right, he was not a
system
careerist.
became more commercialized. I think that's part of it. And also, Kenward, you mentioned, you stayed in Kenward Elmsley's townhouse. Kenward Elmsley was the grandson of Joseph Pulitzer.
Right.
He was independently wealthy.
Right.
So, once he and Joe were in a relationship.
The only one that was.
Yeah, exactly. Joe, Kenward didn't want for anything, and neither did Joe as a
And
result.
another piece of gossip is Joe Lasser used to complain, Kenward stole him from me with the money.
Hi, thank you.
And maybe to an extent that.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just wondering about their engagement with comics. From the slideshow, I was seeing a lot of Nancy. Obviously, I was also seeing like Crazy Cat. There's Nancy. I was seeing a lot of like Crazy Cat and Gasoline Alley, and I was wondering if any of these comics had like a particular like power for them, if any of them resonated with Joe or this group generally.
Nancy.
Definitely Nancy. Yeah.
Nancy.
Yeah, yeah.
Why? Like,
Well,
why
Nancy's not particularly feminine, right? And then Nancy is a kind of pejorative term for being queer. Like, oh, you're very Nancy. So, I mean, he's playing around with a lot of things there.
Well, including the double entendre.
Yeah.
Yeah, and well, one thing, it's certainly the earlier comics that Joe did tend to have more like direct sources, like his first collaboration, I think, with Frank O'Hara was Red Rider and Dog, based on the Red Rider comic strip. So, I mean, almost every drawing in that looks like a Red Rider Western comic strip drawing. But by the time you get to like see comics #2, it's much more synthetic with like many different kinds of drawing and different kinds of images.
I was shocked by that because that was one of the few cartoons I read growing up because it was in the Herald Tribune,
Oh, yeah.
which had very few comics. My parents refused to buy the Journal American or with things with a lot of comics. So
Right.
Red Rider was one of them. And I found out he was gay.
You grew up in New York?
Yeah, I grew up in Queens.
Oh, okay, great.
I was shocked to find that he was gay all these years later.
Yeah. You mean the person who portrayed Red Rider, or?
The artist.
No, you mean comic? They're not real? Comic strips are?
Oh, I see. Yeah, sorry. Got it. Right. Well, yes, that's what we learn in CCOM, yeah, Red Ryder and Dog. Yeah, absolutely.
Frank O'Hara figured it out.
Yeah, true. Yours, yeah, even, it's like along with like Tom of Finland,
But think when you look at that and Wonder Woman, that's copyright infringement. He did them perfectly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I found a couple of the sources for some of the comics. And I was talking a little to Tony before we started the panel, and even those Wonder Woman images, I can tell you, are from Wonder Woman number 146, drawn by Russ Andrew and written by Robert Kanigher. It was an issue dated May 1964 that would have gone on sale in March of 1964. So it was very fresh. It was a very recent issue of Wonder Woman when he drew it and then handed it over to you and then published it in C Comics.
So either Joe picked that out of the trash, because every night he would pick things up, and not only three-dimensional items for his assemblage, but he began to bring printed items in. And they were, war comics, true romance magazines, and so forth. And I had already started from a pop collage poem where I would play with it, not just collage unedited. I would play a little with it. And he brought me, unintentionally, all these, I would never read true romance magazine or war comics. I would have read them 40 years before. But so I had all this, he brought me all this material that I used.
Okay.
But he began to, I told you there's the four rooms, and of course his own, there wasn't even a chair in his bedroom. And people would come over, Ron, or I remember Kathy Fraser came over once, would come over, and it was not only a studio and a bedroom and a general workroom, it was a gallery. People would come and look in this tiny space, but they couldn't sit down. They would have to sit, and they would buy things. And Joe managed to never pay half of anything that I thought he was going to pay, rent, phone, Con Ed, because he would say, well, come in. I would never go into his room, even though you could see right where it was. He would invite me in to look at the things. We figure that at $30, okay, $15, that would take $15 off the phone bill.
Yeah.
So he didn't cheat me, but I was paid in kind, and sometimes I just needed the cash.
Yeah.
But it was.
Do you still have some of those collages?
I have some, but not all.
All right, I think that's about our time. Thank you to our panelists.